I want to talk about a different kind of hurricane, a slow-motion hurricane. A slow-motion hurricane that is sweeping our entire country, not just the Southeast. It is sweeping through our small towns and our cities, our families, our schools, and it's taking lives of a scale that's unprecedented and almost unthinkable. I'm talking about the hurricane, the epidemic of opioid abuse and overdose deaths. Many of us this week are watching with rapt attention Ken Burns' magnificent study of the Vietnam War. We are losing more people per year to overdose deaths than were lost in the entire Vietnam War. That's one way to think about the magnitude of this catastrophe that's striking our country. The problem is it strikes here and there. It strikes a family here, a family there, a community here, a community there, but it doesn't strike all in one place, so it's not so apparent. If we were losing a small city in America of 63,000 people once a year, we would be turning ourselves inside out to solve the problem that was causing those deaths. 63,000 people killed last year through overdose deaths. Almost 400 in my state of Maine, more than one a day. And all indications are that it's increasing, one a day. 63,000 is about 7 people an hour. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year are succumbing to this plague, and that's the right term for it. It's a medieval plague. It is afflicting people all over our country. Lives lost, families torn apart, communities compromised, and it's a huge cost. I hesitate to talk about things like dollars when you're also talking about lives, but it is a cost in both ways. Not only are lives being lost and families being torn apart, but the estimates are it costs our society something over $400 billion a year in everything from medical costs, criminal justice costs, to lost productivity in our society and our economy. But Mr. President, I'm here today because all hope is not lost. Contrary to what some people hear, and you hear sometimes this is hopeless, there isn't anything we can do about it, there is ample evidence that treatment can work. This is not a death sentence. Opioid abuse is terrible, and from talking to people that have suffered from it, it's literally changes your brain, and it becomes almost impossible to escape, but it can be escaped. And the reason we know that is that there's data from across the country, but the reason I know that is my friends in Maine, Andrew, Matt, and Chris. These are people that I know, that I've interacted with, that I've sat down with. Andrew's a guy who's at the University of Southern Maine. He was trapped in the throes of addiction. He went through treatment, and now he's in recovery. Indeed, there are 25 million people in this country who are in recovery, and they'll tell you that they'll always be in recovery because they can never shake this disease, whether it's alcohol, but the really destructive one that we're focusing on right now is opioids. Andrew's made a new life. He's at school. He's at the University of Southern Maine. He's helped form a student-centered community to help people who are in recovery or who are working on getting there. Matthew is a young man who, in 2009, again was trapped by this horrible scourge. Now, he's hoping to go to medical school. Chris is a guy that sat in my office. He worked in the White House. He was in it up to his neck and above. He had criminal justice problems. He was in jail. He was convicted. But now he's a member of the Maine Bar. He got himself through school. He got himself through law school. And there was an important moment that I think all of us should think about when we think about people that are in this situation. When he went to apply to law school, the people at the law school said, well, we don't know if we can take you because you have this record. And his question was, which was brilliant, which indicates to me he's going to be a pretty good lawyer, his question was, what was my sentence when I was convicted? And the response was, 3 years. He said, you're putting me in for life. If you don't let me move forward with my life, you're making that a life sentence, not a 3-year sentence. He was accepted to law school. He graduated. And this year he was accepted, passed and was accepted in the Maine bar. And he's making a contribution to his community. Treatment can work. It doesn't always work the first time. Anybody that's been through this, whether it's alcohol or anything else, will tell you that, or even quitting smoking, it doesn't work the first time necessarily. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it'll take multiple trips through the recovery and treatment process, but it can work. We know it can work. I have 25 million reasons to tell you that it can work. And 3 that I know. I'm going to be introducing a resolution later today. I hope the Senate can take it up and pass it, designating next month as National Recovery Month, honoring and recognizing the people that are in recovery. So if it works, what's the problem? Why is this hurricane still sweeping our country? Why does 2017 look like it's going to be worse than 2016? Well, the sad truth is that of all of those millions of people that are addicted, that are stuck, that are trapped, only 1 in 10 has access to treatment. Only 1 in 10. Now, what we have to do to deal with this problem, of course, is like most other problems, there's no single answer. It involves law enforcement, it involves interdiction, and let me pause for a moment on interdiction. The presiding officer and I are both on the Armed Services Committee, and we've heard testimony in our committee that we only have the Coast Guard and naval resources to interdict 1/4 of the drug shipments that we know of coming up from South and Central America by sea. In other words, we have intelligence, we know of 100 boats, and we can only stop 25. There's no excuse for that. So yes, law enforcement at the source, along the way in our states, is an absolutely essential part of this process, but it's not the whole answer. We also have to work on prevention. And frankly, I've been talking to groups around Maine and around the country on this. We're all still trying to figure out how to make prevention work. What will work? And I haven't yet heard a really strong answer to that question. I guess it varies from person to person. But prevention has to be part of it. But treatment can work. But if only 1 in 10 people have treatment available to them or have access to treatment, that means 9 are sentenced to life and maybe to death. We passed last year, a year and a half ago, CARA, Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act. Great bill, lots of good things in it, but no money. That's like sending the fire department to the fire and saying, fight that fire, but we're not going to give you any water. We know that this costs money, and it's something that we have to commit to. It has to be part of whatever we do around here about health care and about budgets. We have to realize we're losing our people, and these aren't bad people. These aren't people over there. I sat at a round table in a small town in Maine, South Paris, Maine. Next to me was a deputy sheriff. He'd lost his daughter. These aren't strangers. These are often middle-class people. These are people whose kids or sometimes parents, this is not age-specific, are caught up in this scourge. So I guess I want to leave us today with 2 points. One is treatment works, and the second is we need more of it. If we know that something works but only 1 in 10 people have access to it, shame on us for not remedying that situation. And to me, the most tragic case, and I've talked to people in Maine about this, the saddest moment, the most tragic case is when someone who's in the throes of opioid abuse is ready to ask for help and they have to be put on a waiting list. That is tragic and inexcusable. It's hard to get to that point. It's hard to admit that you're trapped, that you're no longer in control of your life. Once you're willing to do that and say, I need help, then it's up to us to be sure the help is there. And that's what we're talking about today. So, this is a different kind of hurricane, but it's a hurricane nonetheless that's destroying our families, destroying our communities, and wrecking the lives of our friends. But it's no act of God. We can't stop the winds of Maria or Irma, but we can mitigate the effects, ameliorate the effects, soften the effects, and that's exactly what we need to do for those who are victims of the hurricane of opioids that's sweeping our country. I hope and believe that we will respond to this challenge as we have at other times in our history, and indeed as we are this week to the hurricanes of the Caribbean. I want to respond also to the hurricane that is sweeping America, that we can indeed ameliorate, mitigate, and soften. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.